You, back row, stand up. Amara Underwood slowly lifted her head. Professor Conrad Whitmore stood at the front of the lecture hall, one hand resting on the edge of the podium, his voice sharp enough to cut through every whisper in the room. "How did you get in here?" A few students laughed. "This is a graduate seminar, not a sightseeing tour. I registered for the course, Professor." Whitmore looked her over, worn sneakers, a simple jacket, an old notebook held together with a rubber band. His eyes carried the kind of judgment that arrived before curiosity ever had a chance. "Are we letting just anyone wander into this room now?" Amara's jaw tightened. "You'd be better off somewhere you actually belong." She did not answer. Whitmore gave a thin smile and turned toward the blackboard. "Mathematics doesn't care how someone looks." Then he pointed to the enormous equation behind him. It represented more than a decade of his life's work, a problem that had shaped his reputation, his research, and nearly every important conversation around his name. "Then solve it." He picked up a piece of chalk and held it toward her between two fingers. "Solve it right now or leave." The room went silent. Amara stood. She walked toward the board, and before long, the man who had spent his career believing he could recognize brilliance on sight would be standing in front of his own work, unable to explain what she had seen years before he was willing to see her. To understand how that moment happened, you have to understand Professor Conrad Whitmore. He had been part of the mathematics department at Kingsley University for decades. The building itself seemed designed to make people lower their voices. Marble floors, tall windows, oil portraits of famous scholars, shelves filled with old journals, the smell of paper, chalk dust, polished wood, and money that had been sitting quietly for generations. Whitmore belonged there in a way few people ever questioned. His name appeared on a textbook read by doctoral students across the country. He had been considered more than once for the highest honors in mathematics. He ran one of the most selective graduate seminars in the department. When he walked down the hallway, younger faculty members moved aside without thinking about it. He was in his 60s, with carefully combed silver hair, round glasses, and an old chipped university mug he refused to replace. If anyone had asked Conrad Whitmore whether he was fair, generous, or capable of seeing beyond privilege, he would have pointed to Wesley Calloway. And he would have believed that settled the matter. Wesley was a doctoral candidate from a tiny rural town in Vermont. His father worked as a plumber. His mother took in laundry. He was the first person in his family in generations to finish college. Whitmore had noticed him early. Quiet student. Serious. Always prepared. Always tired. Always trying to make a small amount of money last a little longer. Without telling anyone, Whitmore created a private fund that helped Wesley travel home to see his parents. He edited Wesley's job applications line by line. One evening, Whitmore passed Wesley's office and saw him eating instant noodles over a stack of research papers. Wesley looked embarrassed. Whitmore said nothing. He went into his own office. A moment later, he returned and placed a campus dining card on the corner of Wesley's desk. Then he walked away. He never mentioned it again. That is the man you need to understand, not a cartoon villain. Not a man who woke up every morning planning to hurt people. A man who genuinely believed he could recognize talent when it entered the room. His failure was simpler and in some ways more dangerous. He believed his judgment was objective. And because he believed that, he rarely questioned the people he failed to see. Amara Underwood was one of those people. She had transferred to Kingsley University after finishing her undergraduate degree at a small state university in remarkably little time, earning a perfect grade point average along the way. Her fellowship paid tuition. It did not pay the rent, so she worked part-time in the library. On weekends, she waited tables. She lived in a small studio apartment above a laundromat where the walls trembled whenever the machines downstairs went into their spin cycle. Inside the front cover of her notebook, she kept a photograph of her grandmother. Her grandmother had worked for the Postal Service in South Carolina. She was the woman who taught Amara long division on the back of grocery receipts. She was also the first person who taught her that showing your work was not just about getting the right answer. It was about knowing why you were right, even when someone more powerful insisted you were wrong. When Amara first met Professor Whitmore, she was standing outside his office reading a bulletin board. He came down the hallway carrying a stack of exam papers. He stopped in front of her. "You, take these to the copy room. I need them returned this afternoon." He held the papers out without looking at her face. Then he started to walk away. A second-year graduate student named Brielle Bennett was standing nearby. Professor, she's in your seminar. Whitmore stopped. He turned. He adjusted his glasses. Then he gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. Oh, well, the offer of coffee still stands. He chuckled at his own mistake and continued down the hall. Amara did not react. She opened her notebook. She wrote something down. Then she closed it and went to class. During a graduate seminar not long after that, Whitmore was proving a technical lemma on the board. 15 students sat around the room. Amara raised her hand. Professor, the third step assumes a condition you haven't stated. The bound only works if the function is bounded below in a stronger way. Whitmore did not pause. That is a common confusion at the undergraduate level. He continued writing. A little later, his teaching assistant, Julian Hollis, raised his hand. Julian was tall, polished, and widely considered Whitmore's protege. Professor, I think we may need to state the lower bound assumption more explicitly. Otherwise, the third step may not hold. Whitmore turned around. His face brightened. Excellent observation, Julian. He wrote Julian's name in the corner of the board as though he were pinning a small medal there. This is exactly the kind of careful reading we need. Brielle looked sideways at Amara. Amara kept writing in her notebook. She did not look up. Julian felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. He had repeated the same point Amara had made. He had been praised for it. She had been dismissed. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He said nothing. Later, Amara went to Whitmore's office to return a book. His door was partly open. She heard two voices inside, Whitmore and a colleague named Graham Caldwell. Amara lifted her hand to knock. Then she heard her own name. Look, Graham, I support opening doors. You know I do. But when admission starts confusing optics with preparation, we end up with students who simply cannot keep up. There was a pause. Whitmore continued. The Underwood student is a perfect example. Hardworking, I'm sure, but she's drowning, and everyone is pretending not to notice. Graham made a quiet sound that was neither agreement nor disagreement. Amara stood still in the hallway. She looked at the book in her hand. Then she placed it gently on a chair outside the office. She turned around and walked away. That night, she opened the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside was an old notebook from her undergraduate days. The handwriting on the first page belonged to a younger version of herself. One line read, Lemma 4.2, assumption stronger than stated. See counterexample in earlier notebook. Write to Professor Whitmore. The last sentence had been crossed out with a single pencil stroke. Amara looked at it for a long time. She did not cross it out again. Soon after, the department announced a major colloquium. It would be recorded, archived, open to the entire department. Brielle found Amara in the hallway before the event. Whatever you do, don't raise your hand. Amara smiled. Why? Because he eats people alive in that room. Amara closed her notebook. She had already made a decision. She was done apologizing for taking up space. That was the simple version. The longer version began in a packed lecture hall with cameras at the back of the room, senior faculty in the front row, the department chair nearby, and Dean Lenora Ashford seated close enough to see every expression on the stage. Julian Hollis stood at one side with a stack of handouts. Amara took a seat near the front. She opened her notebook to a page she had worked over again and again. Brielle sat beside her. Last chance to walk out. I'm good. Whitmore entered wearing a suit without a tie. He took the podium with the ease of someone who had done it hundreds of times, and for most of the lecture, he was extraordinary. That matters. He was not famous because he was foolish. He was brilliant. He guided the room through the architecture of his life's work, the Whitmore Conjecture, a mathematical framework he had spent years building toward. He moved through preliminary lemmas with the rhythm of a man who knew every line by memory. Then he reached the centerpiece. A block of mathematics he described as structurally impossible to solve in a clean closed form. His reputation rested heavily on the argument that no simple answer existed. He wrote the central equation across the board in long lines. Then he stepped back. He opened the floor. His eyes moved across the room. Then they stopped on Amara. You've been writing the entire time. Care to share something with the room? Several heads turned. One student smirked. Amara looked up. I have a question, Professor. Then come up here. Don't make the rest of us turn around to hear you. Show us where you would even begin. The trap was obvious. Whitmore expected her to freeze, to mumble, to feel the weight of the room and retreat into her seat. He expected her to remember who he was and doubt who she was. Julian looked down at his shoes. Brielle gripped Amara's arm. Amara, don't. He's setting you up. Amara picked up her notebook. She walked toward the front. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the floor. It was the only sound in the room. She did not walk up there because she was angry. She walked up because she had finally stopped assuming that confidence belonged only to people with titles. Whitmore met her beside the board with mock ceremony. He held out a piece of chalk between two fingers. Amara took it. She did not look at him. She did not look at the centerpiece equation. She walked past it. Then she moved to the left side of the board, where one of the preliminary lemmas had been written. The third one, a result Whitmore had moved through quickly because, as he put it, everyone in the room should already know it. Amara tapped the chalk beneath one line. "Professor, before we go anywhere near the main problem, I think something is wrong here." Whitmore's smile stayed in place. His eyes did not. The room watched. She had not touched the equation he expected her to fail at. She had gone to a smaller step, a line he had used in multiple published papers, a line most people in the room had accepted without a second thought. To understand what she had seen, you do not need to understand advanced mathematics. You only need to understand one idea. A lemma is like a stepping stone. You use it to cross from one part of an argument to the next. If the stone holds, you keep walking. If the stone cracks, then everything built on top of it becomes unstable. The crack Amara had found was tiny, so tiny that people had looked over it for years, so tiny that the man who wrote the argument did not see it, even while standing in front of it. Amara did not begin with an accusation. She began with a question. "Professor, in your earlier published paper, when you proved this bound, you assumed the function was bounded below by a fixed constant. Is that correct?" Whitmore blinked. The question was so precise that he needed a moment. "Yes, that is correct. And on the board today, in the third step of this lemma, you wrote that the function is simply bounded below." Amara wrote the two versions side by side. They looked almost identical. Almost. The difference was small on the board, but mathematically, it mattered. In the published version, the lower bound was fixed, solid, a floor that could not move. In the version he was using now, that floor could shift. It could sink. It could approach a place the original proof never allowed. Amara turned toward him. "The first version is what you proved. The second version is what you're using today. They're not the same statement." Several faculty members leaned forward. Whitmore's mouth tightened. "That is notational shorthand. The meaning is the same." Amara nodded. "Then can I show you what happens if we read it exactly the way it is written?" She moved to an open section of the board. She wrote down a specific case. A simple one. The kind of example a graduate student could check without elaborate machinery. She chose a function. She showed that it satisfied the weaker assumption written on the board. Then she followed Whitmore's lemma step by step. The conclusion failed. She circled the contradiction with two short lines of chalk. Under the assumption written here today, this case satisfies the setup, but the conclusion does not hold. That means the statement you are using today is not the same statement you originally proved. Think of it like a recipe. The original recipe works. Then someone shortens it because one instruction seems obvious. The new recipe looks almost the same, but one missing detail changes the result. The cake falls. A student in the front row inhaled loudly enough for the cameras to catch it. Dean Ashford did not move. Her eyes stayed on the board. Whitmore stared at the chalk. "You've misunderstood the setup." Amara did not argue. She walked to the chalk tray. She picked up another piece. Then she held it out to him. "Then please write the original published assumption on the board next to mine, from memory, so everyone can compare them." The room became completely still. Whitmore took the chalk. His hand did not visibly shake, but he moved more slowly than before. He turned to the board. He started writing. Stopped. Started again. When he finished, the version he had written was not exactly the published version. It was not exactly the lecture version either. Now 3 versions of the same assumption were sitting on the chalkboard. His original statement, the version from that day's lecture, the version he had just reconstructed from memory, all slightly different. Amara did not point it out. She did not need to. Julian Hollis was no longer looking at his shoes. He was staring at the board. He had spent years studying Whitmore's work. He understood exactly what those differences might mean. Whitmore forced a smile. "As I said, this is only notational shorthand. The substance of the argument is unchanged. Thank you for the question." He returned to the podium. He continued the lecture. He moved past the disputed lemma quickly. He never returned to the third step. Amara walked back to her seat. Two faculty members exchanged a look. Another began typing on a phone. Brielle leaned toward Amara. Her hand covered her mouth. Amara. Oh my God. Amara opened her notebook. She wrote one line, then closed it. She did not look at Whitmore again for the rest of the lecture. But before she left the board, she had said one final thing to him. Quietly, clearly. Professor, I'm not saying your conjecture is wrong. I'm saying this line does not get you there. She had found the crack. The question was whether anyone would allow her to examine it honestly. Whitmore confronted her in the corridor after the lecture. The cameras had been turned off. Students were filing away, but Dean Ashford was still nearby. So were several senior faculty members. Julian stood a short distance behind Whitmore, pretending to read something on his phone. Miss Underwood. A moment. Amara stopped. Whitmore stepped closer. I'd like to offer you an opportunity. Several people slowed down. Dean Ashford turned. Whitmore continued. We'll hold a special departmental session. Senior faculty, visiting mathematicians from another elite university, and a representative from the journal preparing to publish the next stage of this work. He paused. You'll present your counterexample formally, on the record. I will respond. Then the panel can decide whether your objection has merit. He smiled. If, of course, you still believe there is a problem. The hallway went quiet. Dean Ashford stepped forward. She had been in academia long enough to recognize the shape of a power move even when it was wrapped in polite language. Conrad, she's new to this program. You're proposing a senior departmental review with visiting experts and a journal representative. That is not an equal platform. Whitmore's expression remained calm. She raised the issue publicly. She should be free to defend it publicly. I'm only offering her the courtesy of a serious audience. Dean Ashford looked at Amara. You do not have to accept this. Amara looked at the dean, then at Whitmore, then at the floor, only for a breath. She looked up again. I'll be there. Whitmore nodded. Good. I'll have the chalk ready. Then he walked away. Several faculty members followed. Dean Ashford remained for a moment. She placed one hand gently on Amara's elbow. Then she continued down the hallway. Brielle appeared from behind a pillar. She had heard everything. Amara. No, this is a setup. He's bringing senior faculty, outside experts, a journal editor. They are going to come prepared to bury you. I know. Then why are you doing it? Amara looked at her. Because my grandmother taught me long division on the back of a grocery receipt. And I'm tired of pretending I can't read. Brielle stared at her. What does that even mean? It means I'm going. Amara started walking. Brielle hurried beside her. Listen to me. If you stand in that room and you're wrong about one tiny detail, he could make your career here miserable. I know. And if you're right? Amara stopped. She turned toward her friend. I'm right. I've known for years that something in this argument was wrong. I just stopped trusting myself. I'm done doing that. Brielle looked at her for a long moment. Then she hugged her. Hard. Briefly. When she stepped back, she said the kind of thing only a real friend can say. Then go home. Eat something. Sleep if you can. And get ready to ruin a very confident man's afternoon. Amara laughed once. Then she walked away. Behind them, Julian Hollis remained near the lecture hall. He took out his phone. He opened a folder he had avoided for months. Notes. Questions. Inconsistencies he had noticed in Whitmore's drafts. Things he had wanted to ask. Things he had decided not to ask because asking felt dangerous when your future depended on the person you were questioning. His thumb hovered over the folder. Then he locked the phone. He walked away. He did not sleep well. Several questions followed everyone into the night. Would the visiting mathematicians judge the mathematics or the names attached to it? What exactly was inside the old notebooks Amara had been carrying for years? And why did Julian, the student who had worked closest with Whitmore, look like someone who had just realized he had been standing beside a crack without admitting it was there? Amara's apartment was a single room above a laundromat. The floor always smelled faintly of dryer sheets. The radiator hissed at irregular intervals. She came home without turning on the overhead light. She went to the closet. From the bottom, she pulled out a cardboard box. Inside were notebooks. Not one. 12. Cheap composition books with marbled covers. Some were worn soft along the edges. The handwriting in the oldest belonged to a much younger Amara. This was the part nobody at Kingsley knew. Amara Underwood had been reading Conrad Whitmore's papers since she was an undergraduate. At the time, she attended a state college in South Carolina. Her mathematics professor, Dr. Sterling Holloway, kept academic journals stacked on nearly every flat surface in his office. One afternoon, he handed her a copy of one of Whitmore's papers. "Read this slowly, then tell me what you think." Amara read it line by line, footnote by footnote, reference by reference. She took sections of the argument apart at her grandmother's kitchen table, sometimes on notebook paper, sometimes on grocery receipts. When she finished, she wrote a page of notes in pencil. Her conclusion was simple. There was a hole in one of the lemmas. Small, easy to miss, but real. She showed the page to Dr. Holloway. He read it once, then again. Then he set it down. "Your reasoning is correct." Amara waited. Then he said something she never forgot. "Don't write to Professor Whitmore yet. You're young. He is one of the most respected mathematicians in the field. Wait until you have a name. Then people may listen." He had been trying to protect her. She understood that later. At the time, she only understood the message beneath it. Being right might not be enough. So she crossed out the line in her notebook that said, "Write to Professor Whitmore." She put the notebook in a box. She finished her degree, won a fellowship, entered one of the most prestigious graduate programs in the country, and every so often, she opened that old notebook again, just to make sure she had not imagined what she had seen. Now she carried the box to her kitchen table. She opened the oldest notebook. The crossed-out sentence was still there. She turned on a lamp, opened a fresh notebook, and started again. Across town, in the mathematics building, Conrad Whitmore was still awake too. He had pulled out his earlier paper. It sat beside his current lecture notes. The assumptions were side by side, exactly the way Amara had written them on the board. He stared at them. Julian Hollis appeared in the doorway, holding coffee. "Conrad, listen. I've been thinking about the lemma. I think she may be right about one narrow point." Whitmore looked up. "She is not right. I'm not saying she's right about the entire conjecture. I'm saying the lemma may not support the extension the way we are using it." "Julian." Whitmore's voice changed. "I have been doing this work for decades. I do not need a new graduate student to explain my own assumptions to me." Julian stopped. He had rarely heard Whitmore speak to him that way. Not loudly. Worse than loudly. Coldly. The way a door sounds when it locks. Julian placed the coffee on the desk. Then he left. He returned to his own workspace. He opened his laptop. He opened the folder of questions he had been avoiding. And, this time, he started reading. At her apartment, Amara hit a problem in her own argument. She had recovered the original counterexample from her undergraduate notebook. She checked it carefully. Then she found something she had missed. A subtle condition. An assumption she had made without writing it down. Without that condition, her old counterexample did not work cleanly. She put down her pencil, closed her eyes. She did not panic. This was what mathematics was supposed to be. Not pride. Not winning. Not proving the other person foolish. Checking. Testing. Correcting. Starting again. She opened her eyes. She rebuilt the counterexample from the beginning. She made every assumption explicit. She tested each step. Eventually, she found a cleaner case. Simpler. Stronger. It worked. Her phone buzzed. Brielle had sent a message. "People are talking. Whitmore is bringing in another expert." Julian is still at the department. A math blog posted something about the meeting and then deleted it. "People are watching." Amara read the message. She set the phone face down. Then she opened the front cover of her oldest notebook. The photograph was still there, black and white. Her grandmother standing on the porch of a small house in South Carolina. Gray hair pulled back, wire frame glasses, a grocery receipt in one hand, a pencil in the other. Her grandmother was gone now, but one sentence still lived in Amara's mind. "Show your work, baby." Like the whole world is watching. Because one day, it might be. Amara looked at the photograph. Then she closed the notebook. A new message appeared. This one was from an academic address. "Bring everything." The initials at the bottom belonged to Dean Lenora Ashford. Amara read it twice. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Then she kept working. Outside her apartment, rumors spread through faculty messages, private academic channels, and conversations between researchers in different cities. People searched Whitmore's name. People searched the lemma. People speculated. None of it mattered inside Amara's small room. She was reading her own handwriting from years earlier. Some people prepare for a fight by sharpening their anger. Amara prepared by learning to trust the younger version of herself. When morning came, she closed the notebooks, stacked them carefully in her bag, washed her face, tied back her hair, put on the same worn sneakers. Then she took the photograph of her grandmother and slid it into the notebook she would carry with her. She did not give herself a speech in the mirror. She did not need one. She locked the apartment. Then she walked toward campus. The special session was held in a smaller room than the lecture hall. Wood paneling, rows of seats, every chair filled. More people stood along the back wall. Cameras had been set up. A microphone stood near the podium. 2 visiting mathematicians sat in the front row. One was tall and bald. The other had a graying beard and half-rimmed glasses. Both were already taking notes. A representative from the journal sat nearby. Dean Ashford sat at the end of the next row. She looked at Amara once, then nodded. Julian Hollis sat against the side wall. He was looking at his shoes again. Conrad Whitmore stood at the front. This time he wore a tie. He smiled. "Thank you all for coming. Before we begin, I'd like to make a small adjustment to the format." The room became quiet. Miss Underwood raised a concern about one of my preliminary lemmas. In the interest of fairness and in the spirit of allowing a young scholar to present her work on her own terms, I would like her to go first. She can present her counterexample. I will respond afterward. Then we will open the floor. He looked at her. It seems only fair that she be heard before I influence the discussion. He picked up a fresh piece of chalk. The board behind him was completely clean. He had erased it before anyone entered. He held the chalk toward Amara. "The board is yours, Miss Underwood." For the first time since this began, Amara hesitated. Her notes had been built around responding to his argument. She had expected his lemma to already be on the board. Every page in her notebook began from his third step. She had prepared a counter-argument. He had handed her an empty blackboard. Her hand trembled slightly. She pressed her thumb against the edge of her notebook until it stopped. Then she walked forward. She took the chalk. She did not look at Whitmore. She did not look at the panel. She did not look at Brielle. She turned toward the board, and she began writing Whitmore's lemma from memory, line by line, exactly as it appeared in his published paper. She did not pause. She did not look at her notes. The equations came out of memory the way familiar words come out of a song you have heard too many times to forget. The room watched. Even the visiting mathematician stopped writing. A graduate student was reconstructing a senior scholar's long-published argument from memory on a clean board. She moved from one panel to the next. Then she made a mistake, a small coefficient. She wrote a 2 where the original had a 3. She continued for another line, then stopped. She looked back, saw it, crossed out the 2, wrote 3 above it. The correction took only a moment. Whitmore stepped forward immediately. "There it is." His voice carried across the room. "This is exactly the kind of carelessness I was concerned about. We are barely into the presentation, and Miss Underwood has already had to correct her own transcription." He turned toward the panel. "Perhaps you would like to sit down before this becomes more uncomfortable." A murmur moved through part of the room. One of the visiting mathematicians glanced down. Amara stayed facing the board. Whitmore reached into his briefcase. He removed a printed page. And in the interest of full disclosure, Mr. Hollis attempted to reproduce Miss Underwood's counterexample at my request. He was unable to do so. I have his written notes here. Whitmore turned toward Julian. "Mr. Hollis, would you confirm that?" Julian looked up. His face had gone pale. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. Then he nodded. "Barely." Whitmore faced the room again. "A transcription error. A counterexample my own teaching assistant could not reproduce. I think we have heard enough." Silence. Amara stood at the board. The chalk remained in her hand. For one moment, she looked toward the door. If she had walked out, many people would have understood. Some had expected her to walk out from the beginning. She did not. She placed the chalk on the tray, walked to the table, opened her notebook. The photograph of her grandmother was inside the cover. Nobody else could see it, only Amara. She looked at the photograph, closed her eyes, opened them. Then she picked up the notebook, picked up the chalk, turned around. She did not look at Whitmore. She looked at Julian. "Mr. Hollis, could I ask you for a favor?" The room shifted. Whitmore's smile froze. Amara continued. "Would you come to the board and walk us through the verification you performed, step by step? I am not objecting to your conclusion. I only want everyone to see how you reached it." Julian did not move. Whitmore turned toward him. So did Dean Ashford. So did the visiting mathematicians. So did everyone else. Amara held out the chalk. "Please, it won't take long." Julian sat very still. Then he stood. Whitmore said his name sharply. "Julian." Julian did not look at him. He walked to the front. He took the chalk. "What do you want me to write?" His voice was quiet. Amara answered in the tone you use with someone trying not to slip. "Just one thing. Write the exact assumption you used when you tested my counterexample. Exactly as you used it." Julian nodded. He turned to the board. He wrote the assumption in 3 clean lines. Amara waited. "Now write the assumption from Professor Whitmore's published paper. The original version. Place it beside the one you just wrote." Julian froze for a moment. Then he wrote it. The 2 assumptions sat side by side. His working assumption, Whitmore's published assumption. They were the same. Julian stepped back. He looked at the board, and in that instant, he understood exactly what had happened. He had tested Amara's counterexample against the published version. That was why it failed. But Whitmore's newer extension depended on a weaker version. The same weaker version Amara had challenged during the lecture. Julian turned slowly toward the room. He did not face Whitmore. "Professor, under the published assumption, Miss Underwood's counterexample does not work." "That is correct." He paused. "But under the weaker assumption used in the extension presented during the lecture, her counterexample does work." He took another breath. "They are not the same statement." Julian placed the chalk gently on the tray. Then he walked back to his chair. He sat down. He folded his hands in his lap. The room became so quiet that every small movement felt amplified. Conrad Whitmore stood at the podium. His right hand rose to his glasses. He adjusted them, then removed them. He looked at the frames, then at the board, then at the 2 assumptions written by his own teaching assistant. For the first time, he was not deciding what the room meant. The room was deciding what his silence meant. He did not speak. His glasses slipped from his hand. They struck the floor. One lens cracked. Nobody moved to pick them up. The cameras recorded everything. Amara returned to the board. She picked up the chalk. Then she began. "You do not need advanced mathematics to follow what happened next. You only need 5 ideas. First, she circled the weaker assumption, the one Whitmore had used in his newer extension. The one Julian had just confirmed was different from the published version. Second, she wrote a specific numerical case, the cleaner one she had rebuilt in her apartment. She showed that the case satisfied the weaker assumption. Third, she followed the lemma exactly as Whitmore's extension required. Fourth, she substituted the values line by line. The contradiction appeared clearly on the board. The conclusion did not follow. But Amara did not stop there. She had not come to destroy his life's work. She had come to correct the mathematics. So fifth, she wrote a stronger assumption beside the broken one. Then she showed that under this revised assumption, the lemma worked again. The larger conjecture survived. The path forward remained open. She put the chalk down, stepped back, and waited. The visiting mathematician with the gray beard set down his pen. He stood, walked to the board. "Read every line." Slowly, he stopped at Amara's proposed correction. "Read it again." Then once more. Finally, he nodded. He turned toward the room. "She's right. The original lemma, as it is being used in the extension, needs to be amended. Her proposed assumption repairs the problem and preserves the larger argument." He looked at Amara. "It's elegant. I might have spent a year looking for a correction this clean." He returned to his seat. The room exhaled. Then everything changed at once. Faculty members began writing quickly. Someone photographed the board. Dean Ashford covered her mouth. Her eyes were wet. Brielle was crying quietly near the back. Other graduate students stared at Amara as though they were seeing her for the first time. Julian sat against the side wall. For the first time in a long while, his shoulders relaxed. Amara walked slowly along the board. Then she stopped in front of Whitmore. His glasses were still on the floor. She kept her voice low. "Professor, I first read your paper when I was an undergraduate. I saw this problem then. I almost wrote to you. I didn't." She paused. "I'm sorry it took me so long to trust myself enough to walk to the front of the room." Conrad Whitmore opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For a man who had built his life around precision, he could not find a single sentence. Amara turned away. She returned to her seat, opened her notebook, slid the photograph of her grandmother back into the cover. Then she sat down. The room was no longer his. Later, an email was sent to the mathematics faculty. Dean Ashford had ordered a formal review of the journal submission connected to Whitmore's new work. The journal representative who had attended the session had already paused publication until Amara's correction could be incorporated. The dean's message included another important note. The department would review authorship. Soon after, a second message followed. Amara Underwood had been added as a formal collaborator on the revised manuscript. Her name would appear as a co-author. Whitmore had agreed. The dean's office also requested a written acknowledgement for the department record. It was polite language, but everyone understood what it meant. The correction would not be absorbed into someone else's reputation. The person who found it would be named. Not long afterward, Julian Hollis knocked on the door of the shared graduate workspace where Amara was sitting with several students. He carried a manila folder. "Can I talk to you?" Amara nodded. Julian placed the folder on her desk. He did not open it. Several times over the past year, I found inconsistencies in his drafts. I wrote them down. I asked him about them. Every time he told me to leave the mathematics to the mathematicians. Julian swallowed. I should have said something sooner. I didn't. I'm saying it now. The folder is yours. Use it however you think is right. He turned to leave, then stopped. I'm sorry for what happened in that room, and for all the times before that when I noticed something and stayed quiet. He walked away. Later, Wesley Calloway appeared at the doorway. He looked uncomfortable. He did not come all the way inside. I didn't know he spoke about students that way. I only saw the version of him he showed me. He paused. I don't know how to say this perfectly. I'm sorry for everyone who had to see the other version. He nodded once, then left. The recording of the departmental session began circulating internally. Before long, it spread beyond the department. Justice does not always arrive with a dramatic verdict. Sometimes it arrives as a corrected line in a paper, a name added where it should have been from the beginning. A manila folder finally opened. An apology someone offers without being asked. A person deciding that silence is no longer the safest choice. Later, Conrad Whitmore stood in front of the same chalkboard again. The room was full. Many of the same faculty members were present. The visiting mathematicians returned. Amara sat near the front, Brielle beside her. This time, Whitmore did not smile. He did not make a joke. He did not wave away anyone's question. He spoke plainly. He acknowledged that the lemma he had defended was incorrect as stated in the newer extension. Then he named Amara Underwood. He said he was grateful for the correction. The word sounded stiff, unfamiliar, like something he had not practiced enough. But he said it. Then he looked at Amara. He nodded once. She nodded back. Dean Lenora Ashford stood afterward. She announced a new fellowship and reading group for graduate students from non-traditional academic backgrounds. Students who had come from small colleges, state schools, working families, people whose talent had not always arrived wearing the clothes institutions expected. Amara would help lead it. She did not stand. She did not make a speech. She opened her notebook and kept writing. That evening, Brielle came to Amara's apartment with takeout and a cheap bottle of wine. They ate at the small kitchen table above the laundromat. They laughed more than they had in days. After Brielle left, Amara opened her notebook to the first page. The photograph of her grandmother was still there. South Carolina porch. Grocery receipt. Pencil. Amara wrote one line beneath it. Then she closed the notebook. No camera saw what she wrote. Nobody needed to. Amara did not succeed because she was louder than Conrad Whitmore. She did not succeed because she embarrassed him better than he had tried to embarrass her. She succeeded because she had been reading carefully for years when nobody was watching. She had done the work before there was an audience. She had questioned herself, corrected herself, started over when her first counterexample failed. And when the moment finally came, she did not need to perform confidence. She only needed to show her work. There is something deeply human in that. The world will sometimes tell you that you are in the wrong room before anyone has taken the time to learn your name. People may decide what you know by the way you dress, where you studied, how you speak, how much money you have, how comfortable you look, how much you resemble the people who were already there. Sometimes those judgments are loud. Sometimes they are hidden inside polite language. Sometimes they come from people who genuinely believe they are fair. That may be the hardest kind to recognize. But being underestimated does not make you smaller. And being dismissed does not erase what you know. At the same time, this story is not only about Amara. It is also about Julian. About the moment he realized that knowing something was wrong and saying nothing were not the same as being innocent. He had reasons for staying quiet. Fear, loyalty, career pressure, gratitude, all understandable. But eventually he chose responsibility over comfort. That choice mattered. It is about Wesley, too. He had known Whitmore as a generous mentor, someone who helped him when he had almost nothing. That kindness was real. So was the harm Whitmore caused other people. Both truths could exist at once. Growing up sometimes means learning that the people who helped us can still fail someone else. We do not honor kindness by pretending harm never happened. We honor it by becoming honest enough to hold the whole truth. And this story is also about Conrad Whitmore. Accountability did not erase his intelligence. It did not erase the students he had helped, but neither did his good deeds excuse the way he treated Amara. A person's best actions do not cancel their worst ones, and their worst actions do not have to become the only thing they are capable of being forever. What matters is what they do when the truth finally stands in front of them. Do they deny it, hide it, punish the person who revealed it? Or do they begin, however awkwardly, to change? Whitmore's acknowledgement was not perfect. It was not warm. It did not undo the humiliation, but it was a beginning. Sometimes forgiveness begins there, not with pretending nothing happened, not with skipping consequences, but with truth, responsibility, repair, and the willingness to behave differently after the room has gone quiet. Amara's grandmother taught her to show her work as though the world were watching. There is a lesson in that far beyond mathematics. Do your work with care when nobody is applauding. Keep learning when nobody is impressed. Write things down. Ask the question twice. Trust evidence more than ego. Trust preparation more than panic. And when you discover that you were wrong, correct the line. There is no shame in crossing out a 2 and writing a 3. The real danger is seeing the mistake and refusing to change it because too many people are watching. And if you are the person standing at the back of the room, wondering whether you belong there, remember this. You do not have to become louder than everyone else. You do not have to humiliate someone to prove that you were underestimated. You do not have to turn yourself into the person who hurt you. Sometimes courage is quieter. Sometimes it looks like opening an old notebook, checking the work one more time, walking to the board, taking the chalk, and speaking clearly enough that the truth can stand on its own. If you have ever been judged before you had the chance to speak, this story is for you. If you have ever stayed quiet because the person in front of you had more power, let this be a gentle reminder that courage can begin with one honest sentence. If you have ever been wrong about someone, let this be a reminder that changing your mind is not weakness. It is one of the hardest forms of strength. And if there is a younger version of you who once saw something clearly, believed something deeply, or dreamed something boldly before the world taught you to doubt yourself, maybe it is time to listen to that person again. They may not have had all the answers, but sometimes they saw the truth before fear taught them to look away. There is another lesson here that is easy to miss. Being right is important, but what we do with being right matters too. Amara could have used the moment to humiliate Whitmore. She could have matched his contempt with contempt of her own. She could have turned the room into a public punishment. She did not. She corrected the mathematics. She protected the work. She gave credit where it belonged. And when the larger conjecture could be saved, she saved it. That choice says something important about strength. Real strength is not always the ability to defeat someone. Sometimes it is the ability to refuse to become cruel just because someone was cruel to you. It is the discipline to protect truth without losing compassion. It is the wisdom to understand that accountability and kindness do not have to be enemies. You can insist on consequences and still leave room for growth. You can forgive without pretending the harm did not happen. You can accept an apology without erasing the lesson. And you can move forward without carrying every painful moment as proof that the world will always treat you the same way. That is also why Dean Ashford mattered. She did not solve the mathematics for Amara. She did not speak in her place. She simply made sure the process could not quietly swallow her contribution. Sometimes helping another person does not mean rescuing them. Sometimes it means making the room fair enough for their own voice to be heard. Brielle mattered for a different reason. She was afraid for her friend. She worried. She warned her. Then when Amara chose to go forward, Brielle stayed beside her. That is a kind of loyalty people often underestimate. Good friends do not always tell us what we want to hear. Sometimes they tell us the risk. Then they stand nearby while we decide for ourselves. And Amara's grandmother mattered, even though she was no longer there. The lessons we give people can outlive us. A sentence spoken at a kitchen table can become courage years later. A small act of patience can become the voice someone hears when they are standing alone in a difficult room. That is why kindness matters even when it feels ordinary. We rarely know how far it will travel. Maybe the person you encourage today will remember your words when they are about to give up. Maybe the student you take seriously will one day change a field. Maybe the coworker you defend will find the courage to defend someone else. Maybe the apology you offer will not fix everything, but it may become the first honest step toward becoming better. Our choices leave traces, so choose carefully what you leave behind. Let it be respect. Let it be courage. Let it be responsibility. Let it be the willingness to look again when your first judgment may have been wrong. And let it be the kind of decency that does not depend on who has the title, who has the power, or who everyone else is watching. So do not apologize for taking up the space you have earned. You do not need to shout. You do not need the perfect comeback. Bring the work. Bring the evidence. Bring the patience to check yourself. Bring the humility to correct yourself. And bring the courage to stand when the moment comes. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is walk calmly to the front of a room that had already decided who they were, pick up the chalk, and let the truth speak for itself.